Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Clinical Awesomeness. So today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic. So the topic is self-harm contagious? That's the topic we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, I would like to say that I don't have a script here, so I'll be going completely off my opinions and only like a little bit of research I did, but it's mostly my opinions. So I really hope that you won't take this, you would just take this as like a thought, as something that you might think about, maybe consider, because we're talking about like a science here. So I hope that you won't take this too seriously, because it's, at the end of the day, it's my opinion on this topic. So I'll start by saying why I chose this topic for today. So a few days ago, I was in school and I was just minding my own business. I was doing my stuff, and I just felt a little sad. So I didn't do anything really that stupid, but I was just thinking about because if you know me well, you know I've had like a history of like being really sad, a history of depression, but now it's gotten a lot better, which is a good thing. But I was talking to a teacher, and she just told me, oh, like self-harm is contagious. And I was thinking about it, and I've never really thought about it that way. I've never really considered what it's like for it to be contagious in a way. I've never thought of it as a contagious factor. I've never thought of self-harm being contagious in any way. I just thought people were, maybe it's like something, it's maybe a social norm or something at this point. It's so common, but I never thought that seeing someone with scars, seeing someone with cuts might cause another person to feel a similar way. So I never thought about that. And that really made me start thinking about it. I was like, oh, maybe it is contagious. Maybe it is contagious to some degree. So today, that's what we're going to be talking about. So first of all, I'm going to start with a study by the University of Ottawa. So they were investigating how self-harm is socially contagious, I guess. So we're going to be evaluating this research study, I guess. I have a little bit of notes I wrote right here. So first of all, the study was carried out in Canada, and they were looking through non-suicidal self-injury. So it does not count if you're trying to take your life and injuring yourself when you're trying to take your life. That is not the point of the study. It's not investigating that. It's investigating non-suicidal self-injury. And it investigated 1,400 teenagers from Canada. And so they focus on a question, which is, has a friend of yours ever hurt themselves without the intention to die? So that's what they asked those 1,400 teenagers from Canada. They asked them, if has a friend of yours ever hurt themselves without the intention to die? Because they have to kind of like filter out the ones that do have an intention to die, because that's different, right? That's more serious to another degree, and it's not really like you. It would just, I get why they didn't include it in the investigation, because it would possibly change the result, because it's non-suicidal self-injury and suicidal self-injury is very different. It's different levels of, I'm not saying they're not serious, but one of them's not as serious as the other, but I'm just saying they're both very serious, but serious to a different degree. So apparently, not apparently, but this study yielded some very interesting results. So people that say yes to the question of, has a friend of yours ever hurt themselves with the intention to die, were 2 or 3 times more likely to say themselves yes to the question of if they themselves had experience with non-suicidal self-injury. So that's a very interesting part, because 2 or 3 times more is quite a lot more it's quite a lot more. And this research study is very scientific. It's got a lot of it's done in controlled conditions. So it was 1,400 teenagers from the same area, so they weren't investigating different people from different areas, and they were all 14 to 17, I think. or around that age group. So they were all teenagers around the same age group, not older, not adults. So, because some people think like 19-year-olds are still teenagers, which I do get that. But personally, I think they still are. But the teenagers we're talking about are minors. They're not adults. So they were 2 or 3 times more likely to say yes to a question that were asked if they had engaged in non-suicidal self-injury after they were asked if a friend of theirs have hurt themselves without the intention to die, which is basically the same thing as non-suicidal self-injury. So this is very concerning, as it means that it's basically evidence that self-harm is contagious, that when you hear about it from a friend or when you see it on your friend's arm or their legs or wherever, or on their waist or something, they have a high chance of engaging in it themselves. And there's a lot of reasons why they might engage in it themselves. It might be because they want to try out themselves. They want to see, what do they get from it? I don't understand it. Like, I want to try. Or they might relapse. Like, they might have done it before and thought like, oh, maybe I should try this again. Because maybe I didn't yield the results they wanted before, and now they want to try again. Or it might just be like a sudden thought, like, so it depends if the person has done it before, if they have done it, or they hadn't done it before. So this research study, so now I'm going to talk about the problems of this research study. It doesn't talk about if the person that has hurt their friend that engaged in non-suicidal self-injury, if they've done it before themselves. Like, why did they choose to do it after they've seen their friend do it? Like, and the problem is we don't even know if it's a social contagion. So we don't know if it's even related, as in like their entire friend group might all be self-harming. So it might not just be because of that friend who has had engaged in non-suicidal self-injury. So it might just be because, or it might be a family thing. Maybe the family had like history of self-harm, history of depression, which is why the person decided that themselves to engage in self-injury. So it might be because of that, and not be because of seeing that friend who had marks on their hand or marks on their legs or something like that. So it doesn't say whether or not the person was influenced by that person at all. It just says that if they answer yes to the first question, they're 2 or 3 times more likely to say yes to the second question, which was if they themselves had engaged in self-injury, non-suicidal self-injury, sorry. So it doesn't really say why. It doesn't say if it's their first time or the second time. So if they were influenced, if they said, okay, yes, I did engage in self-injury because I saw my friend who had engaged in self-injury themselves. So why? Was it the first time, or was that second time, third time? So did they relapse, or did they just want to try it out? So that's a very concerning thing. Sorry, so this is a huge example of peer pressure. Talking about if it's socially contagious, it also talks about peer pressure, because it also applies. People think peer pressure only applies to like bad habits, but also applies to good habits. That's my personal opinion. I think peer pressure is just a lot of people engaging in some kind of behavior or talking about some type of behavior which would influence someone else to engage in that behavior themselves. So that could be like drinking, smoking, bullying others, which is very common. But it can also be good habits like studying, doing sports, or for me, like podcasting. So it can be good and bad habits both at the same time. So now I want to talk about some other problems with this research study. The data is of 2014. 2014 is relatively, I wouldn't say it's relatively far away, because it's not. It feels really close away, but when I think about it, it's almost like 11 years away. It's 10 years away, 2014, but it's nearly 2025 now. So it's almost 11 years away. So it's a long time for it's a long time for a lot of like social norms to change, a lot of social factors to change, and a lot of different factors that can influence how people think about it. Because I know, like, maybe 100 years ago, maybe self-harm wasn't that prominent, it wasn't that common in a lot of places, and so it's very common now. I would say even in my school, even on the streets, I can see people with like scars, and I've been in hospital myself, so I know that I've seen a lot of people with those scars. I've seen a lot of people with a history of self-harm. So just talking about that, 2014, that I would be more comfortable talking about this if the data was more closer to 2024. So if it was done post 2020, I would be more comfortable talking about data like that. But 2014, it's still relatively good data. It's still very nice data to go off on. And another problem is the sample size. So it's 1,400 teenagers. They're all from Canada. This both gives a good result. This is a good factor and also a bad factor, because good as in it talks about how it's very focused on a demographic of people in Canada, teenagers in Canada, specifically in Ontario. But it's also not very, it doesn't talk about self-harm internationally or self-harm as a social factor or as a social contagion internationally. So it might be different in Hong Kong, it might be different in the US, it might be different in China or in India or in Europe or different countries worldwide. There would be different factors that influence if self-harm is socially contagious. So lastly, I'll talk about the second study, which is very, very extremely similar to the first study. It's also done in Canada. However, it was for teenagers 14 to 17. And it asked them if in the past 12 months, did any of your friends deliberately harm themselves to take their lives, but or if they tried themselves. So the answers and what they resulted in is a 3-to-1 ratio, where women were 3 times more likely to say yes than it was for men. Men 3 times more likely for a woman to say yes to that question. The question of in the past 12 months, did any of your friends deliberately harm themselves without the intention to take their lives? So this shows that not only is it very popular for teenagers to engage in this type of self-destructive behavior, but also especially for women and girls, it is very common for girls, I think, to engage in this behavior. However, it is also very common for men to take their own lives. So this is a very interesting topic, but I'll talk about it for another day. Is that the gender difference between people that want to take their lives and successfully take their lives, and for people that successfully took their lives, and for people that engage in self-injury, because women are more women have a high rate of women that engage in self-harm, but there's also a high rate in men that successfully take their lives. So this is a very interesting topic to talk about. So that's it for today. That's the 2 studies I was going to talk about, and I evaluated both of them. But I would like to talk about my own opinion for a bit. So I would say, personally, if you ask me if it's contagious, I never really, for me, it's not. Like, for me, just personally for me, myself, not my opinion, but for me, when I see other people, I don't think it's socially contagious because it doesn't have an impact on me. It personally doesn't have that big of an impact on me. If I had to engage in that behavior, I would have made up my mind before I saw that person's scars, or that person's, or before I had that knowledge that they were engaging in self-destructive behavior. So I wouldn't say it would impact me that much. However, if you ask me if it's socially contagious as a whole, I would say yes, because I understand that a lot of people would feel the need to fit in, or feel like because at this point it's almost romanticized. I've seen movies where eating disorders or self-harm was romanticized, which I think is a very big problem because it shouldn't be romanticized because it's very dangerous, especially eating disorders. Eating disorders are the mental disorder with the highest death rate. I think depression is nearby, but depression and bipolar is quite close. But I think eating disorders have the highest death rate because of how dangerous it is. Because a lot of people with depression do not engage in self-destructive behavior, but most people with eating disorders do end up impacting their health. So I would say there's a huge problem in the media and society where these behaviors are kind of like romanticized as like I personally know people that do want to like have an ED because they feel like they would fit in better with their friends if they had one, which I think it's a very concerning thing because personally I would not want one. I would not want to be a person counting calories or a person that is binge eating or doing a lot of like counting calories is okay. I do get people that count calories for their health, which I do get because I'm also part of the gym community, which people do. I've heard that people do count calories, but it's also very dangerous because they sometimes it becomes an eating disorder and they don't even realize it. Like that's the biggest problem is that they don't even realize that it's progressed into an ED. So I think that's it for today. So I have some disclaimers and a few things to talk about as usual. So as usual, before I end this, I would like to remind you, please reach out for help if you need it. Please talk to a trusted adult if you're feeling down or unwell. You can also call crisis hotlines, and if you're in an emergency, please call your local emergency services. Please do not hesitate to seek help. And before we finish this episode, I would like to say thank you for listening. And if you have any suggestions or feedback or episode recommendations, please fill out a form. I have a form now on my website that you can find in my Instagram bio. So you can find that website anywhere. Like it's in the Spotify bio, it's in the Apple Podcast bio, it's in my Instagram bio. On my Instagram, it's just Clinical Awesomeness. And if you go to the bio, you'll find my website, which if you press contact us, you would find a form where you can give me some episode recommendations because I'm running kind of low on episode recommendations. And also, please feel free to subscribe to my newsletter and Instagram for mental health tips, which I'll start updating regularly. And lastly, if you're interested about my guest episodes, please go to my website to find more information on that. So I hope that helps. Thank you for listening, and I hope you listen to my other episodes, and I hope you have an awesome day. Bye!